Good morning.
Good morning.
So it's great to be here today again with you. And for those of you, just to illuminate what Judy said is, I grew up in this neighborhood. I played at this particular building with my 5th grade friends. And so I just lived down the street in Renwood. And that's why I did move back. I moved back because my mother was ailing, and that's part of my story. It's a new chapter. It's been a year and a half. And so quite frankly, I'll share, the story I share today is fresh. Part of my story is fresh. But I had a quote that I really wasn't building in because this morning I had have you ever had a technological challenge in your life, like the printer doesn't work? That is not good at 8 o'clock in the morning because I'm not, it's what they call it, like a digital native, with that I can't read my lesson on a laptop and totally organize it. When I print it at 6 or 7 in the morning, it's like ready to look at, ready to edit. So I came fully armed with my laptop, my iPad, my flash drive, and praise the Lord, it printed. But here's a quote that I thought, hearing that lovely song, wasn't that a lovely song, our new song? This is a quote that was just perfect, and it's by a writer and a minister himself, Wayne Muller. We are called to be strong companions and clear mirrors with one another, to seek those who reflect with compassion and a keen eye how we are doing, whether we seem centered or off course, grounded or flailing. As in all sacred and life-giving practices that require a deep and confident faith in ourselves, we need the company of others to create the circle needed for growth, freedom, and healing. And when I think of that circle that we create, that's what this spiritual community is for. That's why we're here together, is to share in that growth and that love. Because as we grow older, you may figure out it's hard to do on your own. We need people to be there to help us remember who we are. So stories have been alive forever, right? Cave, there's the historical capturing of stories in the cave. And the Bible, that Hebrew part of the Bible, those were all oral stories, as well as when you learn more about the Christian Bible, the New Testament, those are stories that were passed on. And in fact, the Gospels, the story of what Jesus said, were not recorded for like 70 years after the incident. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't really remember that big conversation I had with my mom yesterday. And I get out of a meeting with a bunch of people, and we all have different viewpoints. So these, were you in the same meeting I was in? Sometimes those questions, right? So we have this ability to incorporate stories in our lives that have been going on forever. So our whole existence, our families, our communities, everything about us has stories. Places, buildings, art, cities. The earth itself has a story with it. We could not survive without stories. And my particular story, as you have one too, started with my ancestors, the Swedes on my mom's side, and the Irish and the French and the German on my dad's side. So that brings a certain taint to my life. And then it continually shifted. I went to college. I left Kettering. I went to colleges. I fell in love many times over. I moved from city to city, job to job. I discovered spiritual teachings. I traveled abroad. I went to seminary, and most recently, I moved back to my hometown. All of those have an influence on my stories. So my stories have changed through those. And particularly of note is my story, my perception of God has changed as I have found these new thought teachings. And as that changed, it opened my heart, it opened my life, it awakened me to my life. Has that been true for you? I was immensely asleep before these spiritual teachings. It's scary. And it's fun as a minister to watch people wake up from their slumber. That is probably the best gift, is to be there as a space holder, a placeholder, an encourager that life can be different. You can change your life. So I wonder, what is your story? You know your main story threads? What is the story you were born into? And what parts of your story still dwell within you? So today's lesson focuses on the chapter called Preserving Kindness for the World, and it's the 8th of 13 attributes of loving kindness that Rabbi Rami Shapiro outlines in this book. And I'm just going to give you go to the essence of it, just in case you haven't heard it yet. But the essence of the teaching is that as we remember and retell tales of kindness in love, we create a self, ourself, that is loving and kind. So for those of us who always like ours, isn't it always about me anyway, right? But gosh, this is a value. If I share stories of myself or invite stories of myself, of kindness, then I become more kind. It's this loving circle. I attract what I put out. So the chapter on this led me to a supersized teaching. And I love that in my life because I think, well, I'm pretty awake. And so when I get these big ahas, which really happened at 7 this morning, I have to tell you, changed the whole talk. But I love that too. Is that I thought when I started this that I was going to speak on we can be kind, kindness, extending kindness. And no, it's really about our stories. And what the overwhelming truth for me is that we are the result of all that we've thought, and we are all a part of the story we tell. All those thoughts become a story, right? So I can pay attention to a thought here and there, right? I'm focused on that, and I can focus on your stories, the person I'm with, and think, oh, well, this is a pattern in your life that isn't going so well, or this is really good for you, or you've shifted your thinking. But it never occurred to me to watch my stories. And that's where this chapter, the core of it is we are the stories we tell. And so you've probably heard that adage here, change your thoughts, change your life. Have you heard something like that? Mm-hmm. Well, how about change your stories? The life you save may be your own. Right? Absolutely. So as we awaken, we have new stories to tell. And I remember when I was first at Unity Village, I was a retreat minister. And then I served a church community in upstate New York, Syracuse, New York. And sometimes when I'd have to get this material, the material for a talk, I thought, I have got to get a life. I have no other stories. I have to be out amongst the world applying this and doing it. Well, it's a little hard. You may have heard any minister, if you move to a new town, you don't have instant friends. You've been called to serve, so there's not that many opportunities to create great stories. But I had to create ways to do that. So we have stories that we tell over and over again. Maybe you can hear a couple of those in your mind. But we also have some that are hidden in our soul. And if I start paying attention to my stories, whether they're explicit outward or inward, I'll be able to take a measure of the tenor of my life. What is my life really doing? So as I worked with this material, I became aware of how my stories are changing. For example, my reason for being in Ohio for a year and a half is my mom. My mom had a stroke. But that relationship is changing because she changed dramatically. And then I adjust. And I realized I had to let go of a whole lot of stories. A whole lot. A life full of stories of how she did me wrong, whatever, whatever story, whatever theme you want. But, like, for mine it was, she's over attentive to me, she worries a lot, this drives me wacky, whatever it is, those were gone. I was here to serve. So as I focused on this relationship, I look back at March of 2012 when I arrived here. I arrived here 48 hours after she had a stroke. It took a while to get here. And she's at Kettering Hospital, and when I walked in, I hardly recognized my mom, and I had just seen her 5 weeks before. She was vacant, she was frightened, she had a nobody home look, she didn't know who I was, she didn't know where she was, she didn't know who she was, she didn't know what happened, and she was restrained because in her soul, I believe, she was trying to get out, right? She didn't know what's going on. So it was through the love of caregivers and stories and photos that she has been restored to some health, some wholeness. It's modified, but she's present. And I believe when I see her almost daily, that she is living the happiest life she's had. And it's pure joy. So the stuff that she was attached to, the stuff of the home that she left me with, right? Like, there it is, because it's no longer a part of her life. That doesn't have any meaning. What has meaning, the stuff of her life, is these wonderful stories she can pull that I've never heard. I've never heard some of these stories. The story of her upbringing, the hidden stories, I've heard some of them. And then the story of her raising a family and her love, and then sometimes, I don't know if any of you have ever kind of cleaned out somebody's stuff, when I was doing it, no box, no file is left unturned. I thought, what am I going to find out about my mom that I don't know? That was a little scary. But I didn't find, there wasn't anything that was really surprising except how much she loved the people in her life. So, we are our stories. And Rabbi Shapiro maintains that the stories we tell are the stuff of memories. So think about it. What if something happened in your life where you didn't have a memory? You didn't know who you were, your age, your sense of self, and your jobs, your relationships, anything about your past. Where would you start? What would you do? It's a possibility, right? But it's also a clean slate. And we pray that, as I think about it right now, in loving kindness that we send out now, people will love us through it, right? That we become those loving people, that we attract love back to us. So one of the most fascinating people that I've heard about is a woman named Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. Has anybody? And she is a Harvard-trained, a neuroanatomist. But she's a scientist trained in how the brain works. And in 1996, she had a stroke. And she thought this was the greatest thing in her life because she could observe a stroke. You see, she had spent her life examining the brain because her little brother was a little wacky, had been diagnosed as schizophrenic, and she dedicated her life to understanding the brain, particularly schizophrenia. So she suffered a massive stroke when a blood vessel broke in her left hemisphere, and she was rushed to the emergency room and treated, but it took a full 8 years for her to come back to a normal state. She documented it. She remained conscious to some degree, that she details in great detail the day of her stroke and that recovery process in her book, The Stroke of Insight. And if you have the internet, you might want to go on YouTube to TED Talks. She's on TED Talks. So here's what Jill says about the moment that she had her stroke. She says she lost everything. I was just an infant in a woman's body. I could not walk, talk, read, or write. There's no recollection of my life, no recollection of anything, no identification with anything in the external world, and it wasn't necessarily a bad experience either. So she watched herself, she loved that, and she knew she was time-bound, and she describes how it was hard for her to call her associate at work. That she found a card that she could identify with the logo. It was a red brain logo. That's where she worked. And then she had to focus on the numbers, the phone numbers, and match them to the squiggly. They're all squiggly to her. Match them with the telephone to call her friend. And she just said, it was jumble jambles, and that person knew something was wrong, so he drove her and took her to the hospital. And she said when she woke, she was surprised to be alive when she finally came out of unconsciousness. Because she'd been in this wonderful, blissful place of an oceanic paradise with no boundaries. She said, the absence of experience is bliss. It was peaceful and beautiful there. I was with God, she believes. I could see that my spirit was huge. I didn't see how I would be able to squeeze myself back in this very teeny-weeny small body. Describing this state, she sounds a little bit like a mystic, huh? So all the details of life and language were gone to me. Language is a kind of code, and things were no longer reduced to coding. I was looking at the big picture, and I could see how everything is related. Everything is in motion, connected to a dance of grace. The brain is what imposes boundaries, and boundaries convey a perception of separation. But that's delusion. Everything is one. You ever heard that? Isn't that the core of our spiritual teachings. We're all one. Everything is one. Now, this is monumental for a scientist because what does she use the most? Her brain. She has to use language to convey these difficult theories, these concepts, so that healing can happen. So she began to find her way out of her near vegetative state when one day she heard the voice of her internal wise woman, that voice of intuition. And she understood she was being given a choice. And that choice was she could remain where she was, still but in grace, or she could come back and resume her life. But that would mean, as this perspective was, detaching from God, and that was devastating to her. However, the love and encouragement around her from her family, her friends, her colleagues, encouraged her. And at the point in her healing process, she understood only glimmers. But day after day, that love and that encouragement was coming at me, she said. I was wounded, and they were telling me how much I meant. I had to come back because of the love. They loved me back to wholeness. Isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't you love that? Isn't that what we're here for? Without a stroke. That's what the spiritual community teaches us. We are here to see the love in each and every person so that we can remember it too. And when we remember it, we see it, it's just cyclical. So I think my very favorite part of her story is when she was unconscious in the first few days of her placement in the hospital. And she says she no longer understands words, but she had a deep knowing about visitors when they were in the room. And she said she could feel their energy. She could feel if it was negative, she could feel if it was positive, and it was a vibration. So we know that all life is energy, and we are transmitting it at every moment. So we are beaming little signals like radio frequencies, and the world is responding in kind. And that's something that we awaken to as we awaken to spiritual teachings. So she capsulizes the experience of this negative and positive energy as, please take responsibility for the energy you bring to this space. Isn't that beautiful? And it shifts everything. And like when I'm with my mom in her room and somebody negative comes in, I teach my mom this. We have one aide that's a little troublesome, and I'll call her Susie Q. So I make it a point to be there when Susie Q's on, and Susie Q's not, we don't know her life, right? But she's not doing harm, she's just not very interactive, and my mom really wants some interactivity. She wants to be known, she wants to be loved, she wants to be taken and respected as the person she is. So I said, Mom, how about with Susie Q, if you compliment her, if you tell her how great she is, if, you know, I'm using the truth teachings here, right? If you smile at her, so my mom goes, I said, so can't you smile about Susie Q? My mom's sitting there. She said, well, I've tried to be kind. I said, can you smile about Susie Q? And she goes, but as she's practiced that, it's made ever so slightly a difference. You know, because I can see being in that chair all day and all the different people come in. She could put her arm up, but how about if you extend the love? You become the healing force that you are. And she recognizes that she's thought of as positive and pleasant, you know. But there's those, everybody has those few people that noogle you, and they are our teachers. They're our specific teachers. So back to Jill Bolte-Taylor. She remembers as she's laying in bed about this energy in the room where it really escalated, and she said they were all excited that Gigi was coming. And she goes, what is a Gigi? You know, she doesn't know what a Gigi is. But she remembers how the energy room even escalated more when this Gigi arrived, and it was her mother. And her mother scooted by the nurses and came over and just scooted Jill over in the bed a little bit and got in bed and cradled her like she did when she was a young child and just loved her. And Jill describes, all I knew was the feeling of love at that moment. This is big stuff, that how we convey in energetically our love, our kindness, and who we are. And the more that we can look at our thoughts and our stories and stop them and know we're in a bad mood. I mean, it doesn't take that much to get out of a bad mood. You can go up to neutral at least, right? When you're in public. But, and isn't it horrible when you're at home and you get tired of your own bad mood? Wow. So, back to Jill. The other Jill. In crucial ways, she was like an infant. She couldn't talk. She'd forgotten how to walk. Math and reading and a grasp of words and language were beyond her reach. But at one point, someone gave her the parts of a baby puzzle, and she stared at them perplexed, like, what is this? Her mother, of course, was a strong presence in her recovery, and she'd say that when she'd feed me, my mom would never ask a yes or no question. She'd say, you can have soup, or you can have grilled cheese, or you can have tuna. Which do you want? And I would go, soup? Soup? Oh, soup. And she said her mother opened her mental files for her. And slowly, word by hard-fought word, she brought her vocabulary back. Then another dear friend helped her relearn how to walk. She said she was like a toddler, just, only tottering at the beginning. And she started practicing walking in an old folks' home. And then she got to her favorite park where her spirit was lifted and she could walk again. All this is a recovery that's a monumental magnificence, it's a magnitude. We can do this like this. Again, we have to be awake to our stories when they're going off the track, to our thoughts when they're going off the track. How are we working with people? If I'm having an icky interaction, like the other day I had one with the handyman of my building, I didn't save myself in there. But I coulda, when it started to escalate, I coulda, but I didn't. It's not that I didn't choose to. I was in the story, Then this, then that, you haven't done this, what's going on, right? And we get there, but as we grow, it's nice to try and eclipse it before it becomes bigger, or to just say, oh, I'm sorry, wow, and then be compassionate and send that out. So how do we preserve kindness? And Shapiro says, his take on it is we preserve kindness by the stories we tell, the kindness in the stories we tell. It comes from the loving kindness of our past, but also our family history. And so we can go forward and talk to our family members, this is the holidays, about our collective memories. And then what did we do that was fun? Keeping it on the positive side, finding out those blessings that we have in our lives. Ancestors, before some of our parents or grandparents are gone, or they can't speak, how do we get the stories from them? So he talks about creating an ethical will, which is the Jewish tradition. And an ethical will is an oral tradition that parents passed on to their children, their ancestors, the values, the blessings, life lessons, and any forgiveness they wanted with their children. So one of my giving opportunities, my ministry opportunities, I work as a volunteer with Hospice of Dayton, and I do their version of this, which is called Celebrating Life Stories. And you've probably seen snippets on their ads. They have these wonderful little snippets of people. It's really well done. And so we go to homes or to the rooms, and we at their request, the residents, the client's request, the patient's request, and we videotape their life story, what's for an hour to 2 hours, what is memorable to them, what they want to pass on to their children, and what they want anybody to know in their lives. And then we videotape it, or we edit the videotape and then give it to the families, and then they can choose whatever they want edited out. And it is such an honor and privilege to be there at that part of their lives for them to share those tender stories. Because that's what it's all about, is us connecting at the heart. Because the stories contain all the seeds of our humanity, of our humanness. They help us, they teach us, and they allow us to grow. They keep us connected to what matters. But sometimes when I'm automatic, I don't even know I'm telling the same old story again. Is that true for you? And sometimes it's the pity party story. I was really shocked when we went to college that everybody had a bad mother. So we all, or whatever. That mother, that father, whine till you couldn't whine anymore. You just couldn't do it. We all had it. But I believe the reason we come to church, to a spiritual community, is we yearn to become bigger than ourselves, to be better than ourselves. And we bring our children here. We bring our hearts here. And the reason we stay is we want to feed our spirit. We want to be called to our best selves again. We have wakened up ever so gently, and we want to be fully alive. So this is a great place to begin to practice loving kindness and to take it with you. So I'm going to close with a story attributed to the Native American tradition. And maybe you've heard this, it's pretty popular. It's an elderly Cherokee man was talking to his granddaughter, and he said to her, "A fight is going on inside me. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves. One wolf is vicious. He is fear, he's angry, he's envy, he's sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, resentment, lies, false pride, competition, superiority, and ego." Did he leave any out? The other wolf is compassionate. He is joy, hope, love, peace, sharing, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, forgiveness, and faith. And the old man looked into the child's eyes and said, "This same fight of the two wolves is going on within you and inside every other person too." His granddaughter thought for a minute, and he looked at her and she asked, "Which wolf will win?" And the grandfather replied, "The one you feed." So this day I ask you to go forward just mindful. It just starts with an awareness that this is a possibility in my life, that I can have more freedom, more joy, more love than I've ever known before if I'm willing not only to look at my thoughts, but the stories I carry. How do I listen to people? What energy do I bring to the space? And when we bring an elevated energy here, that's one of the upliftments, right? Is the joy we get from the music, from being with others, for hugging, for loving, for being exactly who we are. And that is available for you each and every day. So may we walk away this day feeding the stories of loving kindness in our lives and bringing positive energy everywhere we are present. And so it is.
And so it is.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
So I invite you, as we just close this time, for a small moment of meditative, contemplative peace and joy in our lives. I invite you to just quiet your mind and bodies and come into a place of stillness. Quiet your breath down. And just ask yourself, is there a story that I've been telling the world that I'm a little tired of, that I could begin to let go of today? That if I let go of this, if I were brave enough, if I were courageous enough to let go of this, my life would change for the better. It might involve a little forgiveness. It might involve, well, just being wrong. But I'm willing to let that go. Just dwell on that possibility for a moment. What might that story be in your life? That one you're even tired of hearing. And then visualize in this room, in your mind, a white ball, white light. And release that like a balloon. Release that into that white light, that story. Let it go. All of our stories are there right now. The beginnings of letting go. We've placed them there and we lift them up. We just gently push them into the air. They are gone now. And now make a promise to yourself. I will be vigilant about this story. I am willing to let it go. I hereby live my life free of the chains that bound me from this story. For as I change my stories, I change my life. I change the lives of others around me. And so with this knowing, we go forward this day in loving kindness and love.